London received the message at 8:42 a.m. It began with 3 words. "We are safe." They weren't. The wireless operator in the basement of the Gestapo headquarters in The Hague adjusted his headset, the hum of the transmitter mixing with the faint echo of footsteps on the tiled floor above. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and machine oil. A single light bulb flickered overhead, throwing pale circles across the wall where a map of Holland hung, riddled with colored pins and thin red strings that stretched like veins. Across from him sat a man in a tattered brown coat, hands bound, face swollen. His name was Arthur Cole, an agent of Britain's Special Operations Executive, captured 2 days earlier in a safe house outside Rotterdam. The Gestapo had broken the radio codebook before they broke him, but they still needed his voice. London trusted his voice. The German officer standing behind Cole, Oberleutnant Hermann Gisks, was not a brute. His uniform was immaculate, his tone calm, almost courteous. "You will send the message," he said in perfect English. "Exactly as you always do. Tell them you are safe." Cole's lips moved stiffly. He was exhausted, shaking from fever. He looked at the microphone, then at the officer, and said quietly, "And if I refuse?" Gisks smiled thinly. "Then we find someone else to use your code." He didn't need to say more. Cole leaned forward, pressed the key, and began to tap. The rhythm was familiar, his own words turning against him. In London, deep in an office on Baker Street, Colonel Norman Davidson of the SOE read the incoming Morse with a growing sense of relief. For weeks they had feared their Dutch network had gone dark. Now, at last, the familiar call sign blinked back across the channel. "We are safe." He repeated it aloud, smiling to his aide. "You see? They're fine." Parachutes reached their targets. Outside, the rain had stopped. Londoners walked the streets with newspapers under their arms. The war felt far away. Davidson poured himself a cup of tea and dictated a short cable. "Continue as planned. New drops authorized." Somewhere above Holland, another Halifax bomber was already being loaded. Back in The Hague, Gisks listened to the faint hum of the radio as Cole's coded message went out. When the final dot clicked into silence, he nodded to his operator. "Good," he said. "Now send their thanks." The operator began typing a short reply in London style, complete with the small quirks and abbreviations the British used, even a spelling mistake deliberately repeated from earlier transmissions. "Our agents report excellent morale. Awaiting next shipment." Cole's breathing quickened. "You can't do this," he whispered. "They'll know." Gisks turned to him. "Do you really think they read between the lines? They trust their system more than they trust their men." He was right. Later that afternoon, Cole was moved to a cell. He asked for paper to write to his mother. They gave him none. That night, the guards heard a faint tapping. Morse on the wall, a desperate attempt to warn other prisoners. "They have the radios." By morning, the tapping had stopped. For the British, Operation Noordpool, as it would later be called, began with confidence. The network in Holland was believed to be one of their most successful. Dozens of messages confirmed successful sabotage, secure meetings, and hidden supply caches. Each report came with the same short security check phrase meant to prove authenticity, a small, prearranged mistake inside the code. But that morning, the Gestapo had changed it. A single dot. One alteration too small to notice unless you were looking for it. London wasn't looking. Every time a new message arrived, the operators smiled and logged it neatly. "No irregularities detected," they wrote in the margin. In the archives, that exact note still exists, typed on thin yellowing paper, the ink smudged at the word irregularities. Gisks called his operation the England Spiel, the England game. He considered it chess. Each captured agent another pawn, each transmission another move. His goal was not to kill them all at once, but to let them keep the illusion of life long enough for London to trust the board completely. Within a month, the trap was perfect. The Gestapo had 3 working British radios and a handful of codebooks seized from captured agents. Every time London sent new instructions, they answered politely. Every time the British scheduled a drop, German soldiers waited with trucks and dogs. One night, as a new agent was captured outside Utrecht, Gisks stood over his radio operator and said, "Tell London their man landed safely." He turned to his assistant. "They will thank us for our efficiency." And they did. The next morning, a message from London came back through the same frequency. "Splendid work. More supplies to follow." In the official SOE war diary, dated April 8, 1942, the entry reads, Operation Noordpool proceeding smoothly. Dutch network expanding. No cause for concern. No one in London knew that the man who had sent those first reassuring words, "We are safe," was already dead. But the Germans did, and they were listening. And the smallest detail they changed that morning, a single dot of Morse, would soon cost Britain hundreds of lives. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. He wasn't a soldier. He was a hunter, and his prey spoke English. Herman Gisks walked through the gray corridors of the Gestapo headquarters in Amsterdam with the calm precision of a man who understood both cruelty and order. He never raised his voice, never struck a prisoner himself. He didn't need to. Words, used correctly, could be sharper than knives. On his desk, under a glass ashtray, lay the morning's decoded messages from London, instructions for non-existent British agents scattered across the Netherlands. Gisks read each one slowly, marking the edges with a fountain pen. To him, it was art, a performance carried out in 2 languages, over 2 radios, across 1,000 miles. His subordinates called it England's spiel, the England game. But to Gisks, it wasn't a game at all. It was control. He had not started as a spy catcher. Before the war, he had hunted deer in the forests near Bremen. He had learned patience there, to wait until the prey believed it was safe before pulling the trigger. Now, his prey were men who carried codebooks and cyanide pills instead of rifles. One evening, a new prisoner was brought in, a young British agent named Peter Bloom, captured after a botched supply drop near Arnhem. Gisks greeted him politely, offered him a cigarette, and spoke in fluent English. "You are a brave man," he said. "London trusted you. So do I." Bloom stared at him, unblinking. "Then you know I won't talk." Gisks smiled. "Everyone talks. You'll simply choose what words to use." He placed a radio microphone on the table between them. "You will tell your people you are safe. Nothing more. Do this, and you live another day." The agent hesitated, then spat on the floor. 2 guards stepped forward, but Gisks lifted a hand. "Leave him," he said. "Time will teach him better manners." 3 days later, hunger and exhaustion did what violence could not. The next message to London went out exactly as ordered, except for one tiny alteration, a mischecked phrase that should have signaled duress. In London, it was overlooked. The deception began to grow. Within months, the Gestapo controlled every British transmitter in the Netherlands. Agents dropped by parachute were captured within hours. The Germans even arranged for the captured operators to send friendly, reassuring notes to their supposed comrades, using phrases like "weather fine," "morale high," that London loved to read. Inside the SOE headquarters, a clerk joked, "Our Dutch boys seem to be the only happy ones left in Europe." Outside, in occupied Amsterdam, Gisks watched another truckload of captured agents arrive. He noted each name, cataloged each radio, and sent another fake report across the channel. Supplies received. Preparing next mission. The brilliance of his plan lay in the details. Gisks insisted his team mimic not only the British code patterns, but also their mistakes, the small inconsistencies that made transmissions seem human. He had his operators drink black coffee, stay awake for days, and sign off messages with the same slang the British used. Once, when a German technician accidentally corrected a repeated word, Gisks scolded him. "Do not make it perfect," he said. The British trust imperfection. It worked. Between 1942 and 1943, the Gestapo intercepted over 50 British agents and seized 96 containers of weapons and explosives, all delivered by London's own bombers to fields the Germans had prepared. Each night, Gisks wrote a single line in his private journal. Another message received. Another fool delivered. But beneath his calm exterior, something darker began to stir. He had seen too many of them, boys barely older than his own nephew, die quietly in interrogation rooms or vanish into camps. One night, as he stood by the radio operator, he heard a British voice come through the static, a young man's final message before capture. "Tell them, we did our best." The line went dead. For the first time, Gisks felt something close to pity. Then he crushed it, like an insect. "Prepare the next transmission," he ordered. In London, the confidence only deepened. Reports from Dutch Section B were so optimistic that they were used to justify expanding the entire sabotage network. New recruits trained in England. men and women who believed they were joining a thriving underground resistance. One of them, a 23-year-old radio operator named Jack Elms, wrote in his journal before departure, "They say the Dutch are doing miracles. If I can help them, I will." He never even touched Dutch soil. His parachute was found hanging from a tree 20 miles east of Eindhoven, beside a waiting Gestapo patrol. By late 1943, Gisks had become a legend inside German intelligence. Even his superiors in Berlin admired the elegance of his deception. He was promoted, awarded the Iron Cross, and nicknamed Der Puppenspieler, the puppet master. He accepted the medals with polite detachment. But in private, he told his adjutant, "The English think they are winning because they cannot imagine losing." He paused, staring out the window at the lights of occupied Amsterdam. "That," he added softly, "is their greatest weakness and our greatest weapon." In an office across the channel, a British officer raised a toast to the heroes of Holland. New shipments were ordered, new parachutes packed, new agents briefed. No one in that room knew the man in Amsterdam was already reading their next move before they even made it. And when London decided to send help, reinforcements, weapons, and men, the Gestapo was already waiting at the landing fields. They called it the England game, and the Gestapo always won. Spring, 1943. The Dutch countryside lay under a thin veil of fog. From the air, the fields looked peaceful, canals glinting in the moonlight, farms quiet and still. But for the men falling through that sky, nothing about it was peaceful. At 1:17 a.m., the bay doors of a Halifax bomber opened. Parachutes bloomed against the darkness, small, white flowers drifting toward death. Each man carried a radio, a revolver, and a cyanide pill. They thought they were landing among friends. On the ground, a signal lamp blinked twice, the prearranged sign for safe zone secured. The British pilot saw it, exhaled in relief, and banked the plane home. Below, the men landed one by one, stumbling through wet grass. A voice called out, "Welcome, friends." It spoke perfect English, and the next sound was the snap of handcuffs. By dawn, the trucks were gone. The fields were empty again, except for boot prints and a torn parachute fluttering in the wind. The Gestapo worked quickly, efficiently, as always. Another team caught in the net. In London, the following morning, the telegraph office received a new coded message. It came from Agent 47. Supposedly one of the men dropped that night. The transmission was short, confident, landed safely. Mission proceeding. Awaiting supply drop. Colonel Davidson read it and smiled. "Textbook," he said. "Our Dutch circuit is unstoppable." He signed another order for supplies, 2 tons of Sten guns, ammunition, and explosives. They would be dropped the next night on the same coordinates. That evening, in a farmhouse outside Utrecht, Gisks poured himself a cup of coffee and watched as his operators prepared the next radio transmission. The young German technician looked uneasy. "Sir," he said quietly, "should we warn Berlin that London keeps sending more? This feels excessive." Gisks shook his head. Why spoil perfection? He leaned forward, smiling faintly. "As long as they believe, the war sends itself to us." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, the radio hissed, a voice speaking across the channel, unaware it was talking to its own executioner. Over the next months, the pattern repeated with cruel precision. Each week, more men parachuted into traps that had been carefully prepared. Fake resistance fighters, forged maps, welcoming handshakes. Each week, the Gestapo collected them like pieces in a game. Between 1942 and 1944, 54 British agents and more than 90 containers of supplies were captured. Not one mission succeeded. Yet every report reaching London sounded like victory. Dutch resistance expanding, morale excellent, operations proceeding smoothly. The British intelligence officers began to cite the Netherlands as a model network. They gave speeches about it. New recruits trained using Holland as a case study in success. No one questioned why not a single photograph, letter, or eyewitness account had come back from the field. There were warning signs. A cipher clerk named Evelyn Grant noticed small irregularities, phrases repeated too often, timing that didn't match field schedules. She raised her concern to her superior, who dismissed it with a smile. "Miss Grant, you worry too much. These boys are heroes. Let's not second-guess them from behind a desk." She filed her doubts anyway. The report was never read. Meanwhile, in Amsterdam, Gisks ordered new transmitters to replace the ones that burned out from overuse. He kept the prisoners alive just long enough to send their final Czech messages, then had them transferred quietly to concentration camps. He did not enjoy it, but he believed in efficiency. In one intercepted diary later found in the archives, a captured agent wrote, "They let us send our words home, and then they killed us for them." By late 1943, even Berlin was impressed. Operation Nordpol had become a legend, the cleanest deception in the Reich's history. It was so flawless that London's own intelligence services began sending one another congratulatory memos about their cooperation with the Dutch. Gisks pinned those memos to his wall. "The English," he told his staff, "are like chess players who never look at the other side of the board. But every game, even a perfect one, carries the seed of its own collapse." One evening in autumn, a German operator made a small mistake, a repeated code group that had not been used before. It went unnoticed by his superiors, but far away in London, a junior analyst paused mid-translation. He frowned, underlined the error, and wrote in the margin, "Possible irregularity. Investigate." The note sat on his desk for 3 days before anyone read it. By the time they did, 2 more planes had already taken off. It started with one wrong word, a name that no one should have known. Autumn, 1943. In a gray building off Baker Street, the air in the communications room was heavy with smoke and exhaustion. Dozens of operators sat behind typewriters and transmitters, decoding the steady stream of messages that crossed the channel each night. Among them was Mary Haynes, 26, quiet, meticulous, the kind of person who noticed details others overlooked. She'd been at her post for nearly 12 hours when a new transmission from Holland arrived. The Morse came in steady, confident, a tone she knew well. She began to translate automatically, but halfway through the message, she froze. There it was. A name. Tommy Gray. Mary's breath caught. She knew that name. She had trained with him in 1941, watched him board a transport plane bound for the Netherlands. And she had read his death notice 5 months ago. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. She replayed the sequence in her head, checked the cipher twice. No mistake. The message said plainly, "Tommy Gray reports success near Eindhoven." Her stomach turned cold. She rose from her chair and walked to her supervisor's desk, the decoded paper shaking slightly in her hands. "Sir, there's an error in the Dutch traffic. They've mentioned Agent Gray, but he's..." The man barely looked up from his coffee. "He's what?" "Dead, sir." He frowned, took the sheet, skimmed it. "Probably another Gray. Common name." "No, sir. The call sign, it's his." He sighed, tired. "Miss Haynes, I've got half of Europe asking for updates. Let's not invent ghosts tonight." She wanted to protest, but the phones were ringing, new cables arriving. The room never stopped. So she returned to her desk and filed the message like all the others. But she didn't forget. That night, after everyone had left, Mary stayed behind. She pulled out older transmissions from the Dutch section, neat carbon copies bound with string. Line by line, she compared them. Something was wrong. The spacing, the rhythm of the codes, even the phrasing, it was too perfect. The operators she knew in the field had their quirks. A missing dot here, an accidental repeat there. But now, every message read as if written by the same hand. And the check phrase, the tiny coded error used to confirm the agent wasn't under duress, was gone. Every single one. Her fingers trembled as she traced the patterns. Could it be deliberate? She thought of the laughter in the break room, the toasts to "our boys in Holland," the speeches about success. If she was right, it wasn't success, it was murder. At 2 a.m., she typed a note to her section chief. Possible compromise of Dutch circuit. Check phrase missing from last 7 transmissions. She left it on his desk and went home, heart pounding. The next morning, the note was gone. When she asked about it, he waved her off. Filed and reviewed. No issue. Likely operator fatigue. She nodded, said nothing. But that night, she began making copies of the new ciphers for herself, just in case. Weeks passed. The pace of messages increased. Each night, more planes flew, more agents reported success. The higher-ups were thrilled. One colonel even joked that the Dutch were so efficient they make the Germans look lazy. Mary stopped laughing at those jokes. She worked in silence, eyes scanning every transmission for the slip that would prove her right or wrong. But the Germans were meticulous. Too meticulous. One evening, as the rest of the office emptied out, she sat alone with the hum of the machines and the ticking of the wall clock. The window rattled with wind from the Thames. And then the radio crackled again. She leaned forward, headset on, pencil poised. The message came slowly, clearly, addressed not to London in general, but to her. "Miss Haynes, this is Tommy. I hope you are well." Her pencil fell. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The signal repeated, unmistakably using his old call sign. "It's good to hear your voice again." She ripped off her headset, heart hammering. The operator on the next desk stared at her. "Mary? What is it?" She couldn't answer. She knew Tommy Gray's voice, the way he spoke, the way he signed his messages with a small, deliberate pause before his last letter. It was there now, exactly the same. But Tommy Gray had been buried in a field outside Rotterdam 6 months ago. She gathered her papers, left the room, and didn't look back. That night, she wrote one sentence in her journal. "They're using our dead to speak to us." And a week later, another message arrived, addressed to her again. This time, it began, "Mary, you were right to doubt." They opened the files and realized they'd been helping the Gestapo. March 1944. The lights in room 47 of Baker Street burned long past midnight. The rest of the SOE building was silent, but inside, 3 officers sat surrounded by stacks of coded messages, ashtrays, and cold tea. The air was thick with disbelief. Colonel Davidson read one decoded transmission after another, his hands trembling slightly. "Look at this," he said, tapping the paper. "Every message from Holland for 2 years, not a single security check. Not one." Captain Elliot leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "That's impossible. We've trained these men ourselves. They wouldn't forget the code phrase." Mary Haynes, standing by the file cabinet, said quietly, "They didn't forget. Someone took it out." The words hung in the air. No one spoke. Hours earlier, she had broken protocol, slipped into the restricted archives, and gathered the radio logs herself. It was reckless, maybe career-ending. But when she found the messages addressed to her, the ones signed with the name of a dead man, she knew she couldn't stay silent. Now, as the 3 of them cross-referenced the transmissions, the picture became clear. Every code, every drop zone, every instruction London had sent, all of it had gone straight to the Germans. Davidson slammed his fist on the table. "Good God, we've been running their war for them." Elliot stared at the maps pinned to the wall, red circles marking each supply drop. "All those men," he whispered. "We dropped them right into traps." By dawn, the truth was undeniable. The Dutch resistance network, which London had praised for its efficiency, didn't exist. It had been dismantled months ago. The voices they had trusted were ghosts, transmissions forged by the Gestapo under Giske's control. Mary spread out the old field reports, her hands covered in graphite dust. "It's not just the agents," she said. "Look at the coordinates. They kept sending us the same pattern, same landing fields, same supply routes. We thought it was routine. But every point leads straight to German-held zones." Elliot read aloud one of the recent orders, his voice cracking. "Drop 120 containers east of Utrecht. Resistance awaiting." He lowered the paper. That was February 12th. 20 men went. None came back. Davidson's face was pale. "We signed those orders ourselves." In a small, unmarked folder, they found a translation of a captured German report. The heading read, "Operation Nordpol." The contents made their blood run cold. Lists of captured British agents, inventories of weapons seized, even copies of intercepted telegrams from London, carefully annotated in German handwriting. At the bottom, a single line from Major Hermann Gisks, "Our greatest ally is British trust. We answer their faith with precision." Mary stared at the words until they blurred. "He's right," she said. "We trusted too much. We wanted to believe the good news." Elliot exhaled slowly. "So what now? We report this?" Davidson looked up sharply. "To whom? The War Office? Churchill himself? You realize what this means. 2 years of operations, millions in resources, and over 100 lives lost, because we didn't notice one missing phrase." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of it crushing him. "If this gets out, SOE is finished." For a long time, no one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked louder with each second. Finally, Davidson stood, gathered the papers, and fed the first few sheets into the small incinerator in the corner. The flame caught instantly, curling the edges of the pages. Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, we can't just burn the truth." He turned to her, eyes hollow. "We're not burning the truth, Miss Haynes. We're protecting what's left of it." The firelight flickered across his face as more papers turned to ash. "Officially," he said, "this never happened." But Mary couldn't stop thinking about the dead man's message, the one signed, "You were right to doubt." She went home that night with one page hidden in her coat pocket, a copy of Gisks's final report, the line that condemned them all. She folded it once, twice, and locked it in a drawer beside her bed. Years later, when the war was over, that page would resurface, yellowed, burned at the edges, but still legible. And by then, it would be too late to change anything. After the war, London called it a minor communication failure. The files told a different story. Q. 1948. The reading room of the Public Record Office was silent except for the ticking of a clock and the dry whisper of paper. A young journalist named Peter Rowe sat at a long oak table, staring at a gray box labeled HS9, England Spiel. He had no idea what the word meant. Not yet. Inside, the air smelled faintly of rust and old glue. He lifted the first folder and began to read. The German reports were methodical, precise, chilling in their calmness. Captured, 54 British agents. Seized, 96 supply containers. All communications intercepted and duplicated. London continues transmissions. Confidence, high. Rowe blinked. The stamp on the corner said Gestapo Headquarters, The Hague, 1944. Beneath it, a handwritten note in English. No irregularities detected. He turned the page. Someone, a woman's hand, neat, steady, had underlined a sentence in pencil. Security checks missing throughout. Next to it, a faint initial, M. H. Mary Haynes. He'd heard the name once, a radio operator who'd vanished from the service after the war. The next sheet stopped him cold. A German officer's note, translated by a British clerk. Our greatest ally is British trust. We answer their faith with precision. Major Herman Gisks. Rowe leaned back in his chair. The phrase rang like a confession written in triumph. Over the next hours, he read until his eyes ached. Message logs, landing maps, reports from agents who never returned. Each page exposed the same pattern, the perfect deceit. For nearly 2 years, the Gestapo had used captured transmitters to feed London false reports, while London, unaware, kept sending more men, more weapons, more hope into the trap. He found an internal memo from 1944, minor irregularities in Dutch communications. Recommend continued operations to preserve morale. Preserve morale. He could almost hear the silence that followed those words, the kind that replaces guilt when no one dares to name it. A week later, Rowe crossed the channel to The Hague. In a government archive, a Dutch clerk handed him a transcript of Gisks's testimony from 1948. The tone was dry, polite. "Do you regret the loss of life?" the judge asked. Gisks's reply was simple. "No, we merely used what we were given." Rowe read the next line twice to be sure. The man who had destroyed an entire network of Allied agents had lived to retire in Dusseldorf, and even published a memoir. He traveled next to Amsterdam, where a museum displayed relics from the occupation. In a glass case sat a cracked field radio. The volunteer whispered, "That came from a captured SOE agent. We don't know his name." On the side of the metal box, scratched in trembling letters, were 5 words. "Trust is the first casualty." Rowe stood there for a long time. Behind him, the sound of bicycles on cobblestones faded like echoes from another war. When he returned to London, he wrote his story, 15 pages of names, dates, and evidence. His editor called it too bleak, said readers wanted victory, not shame. "We'll print a summary," the man said. "Call it Lessons in Wartime Communications." The truth, again, was buried, this time under the polite weight of editing. But Rowe kept a copy for himself. He slipped it into an envelope, along with one of the photocopied pages from Q. Mary Haynes's pencil marks and the German phrase that haunted him. "We answer their faith with precision." Months later, he met a woman outside a lecture hall. Gray hair, kind eyes, and a quietness that seemed too deliberate. She introduced herself as Mary. "I read your article," she said. "Short, but honest enough. He hesitated. You were there, weren't you? She nodded. I heard the ghosts talking before anyone else did. They sat on a bench overlooking the Thames. She told him about the night she realized their agents were already dead, how she'd tried to warn her superiors, and how her notes disappeared. I kept one page, she said softly. The one that proved the lie. Sometimes, proof is all you can save. When she stood to leave, she looked back once. If you ever tell this story properly, she said, don't call it failure. Call it what it was, trust, murdered politely. Years passed. History moved on. England's spiel became a footnote in intelligence manuals, a lesson whispered in training rooms. But the box at Kew remained. Inside it, the paper yellowed, the ink faded, yet the words endured. Trust is the first casualty of war. Mary died in 1957. Her will left one note. We burned paper to protect reputations. We should have burned our arrogance instead. Peter Rowe published her letter posthumously. It ran in a Sunday column titled The Message That Shouldn't Have Arrived. The last line was hers. Wars are not lost through bullets. They're lost the moment we stop doubting perfect messages.